Hey, Tech Policy Grind. Emory back once more to introduce a very internet policy episode of TPG recorded while at State of the Net 2018 last week. On this two-parter, we'll hear from Commissioner Karen Charles Peterson and Dr. Rosyln Layton. Commissioner Karen Charles Peterson is the Commissioner of the Department of Telecommunications and Cable for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Joe and I were thrilled to stream our conversation with Commissioner Charles Peterson live as we had it last week at State of the Net 2018, and we're just as thrilled to be releasing it as a bonus episode of Tech Policy Grind today. We talk about responsible municipal internet regulation, bridging the digital divide, and ways local governments are stepping up in response to the repeal of the Open Internet Order. And coming up right afterwards is our discussion on net neutrality with Dr. Rosyln Layton, who comes down on decidedly different lines of reasoning than Commissioner Peterson. We want to thank both Commissioner Charles Peterson and Dr. Layton for joining us at State of the Net for a spirited discussion about some of the most pressing issues facing internet policy, the state of net neutrality and the digital divide. Keep it tuned right here for the rest of the week, as we've got more excellent interviews from State of the Net 2018, including discussions on fake news with TechDirt's Mike Masnick, and a survey of the witch's brew of cybersecurity with Dr. Betsy Cooper, Executive Director of Berkeley Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. So, sit back and enjoy Day 3 of our bonus State of the Net 2018 episodes of Tech Policy Grind with Commissioner Karen Charles Peterson. Hey Grinders, we are live. This is Emory, Roan, and of course, Joe Jerome here at Washington, D.C. for the Internet Education Foundation's State of the Net Conference. It's the 4th conference, and it is the largest internet policy conference in the country.
Sitting next to Emory is Commissioner Karen Charles Peterson. She is the Commissioner of the Department of Telecommunications and Cable for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and she's going to be participating on a panel this afternoon. Wireless, we need a new generation to connect the Internet of everything. So, Commissioner Charles Peterson, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And I guess our first question is, what exactly do you do at the Department of Telecommunications and Cable?
So, like my title says, I regulate telecommunications and cable. So we regulate telephone, wireline service in Massachusetts, and basic service for cable subscribers in Massachusetts. So we don't regulate your bundled packages,
okay.
But if you are a basic service subscriber, so it's mainly the elderly and disabled community that sort of they don't have the extended package.
Sure.
We regulate that
And
service.
How do you regulate that? Yeah. What are they complaining about these days?
So consumers call the department on a whole host of issues. They call us regarding their bills. They call to understand their bill. They call regarding service outages. It's a whole host of issues. Sometimes they are working with the provider and they're getting nowhere with the provider, and they need us to intercede and to help out.
Okay. So what does that look like? Have you had to intercede recently, or?
We do it every day.
Every day?
Every single day. So a consumer can either walk into the department, they can call the department, they can email the department, so they can go online. If they have broadband, they can go online and file a complaint online. One of our customer service representatives will collect it and call the consumer and sort of meter it out. But yeah, so these complaints come in various ways, like I just explained, and we take them, and depending on what it is, we work with the constituent and we work with the provider to come to some sort of understanding. So if there's a dispute regarding the bill, so let's say a consumer has been paying their bill for a number of months because they're disputing something on the bill, we will try to negotiate with the provider so that they can get to a place where they can pay their bill and everyone is happy.
Okay, so getting to the topic of your panel, we're talking about a new generation of wireless. Do you want to talk about that? What does that look like? What exactly makes the next iterate or the next technology push a whole new generation?
Because, as you know, probably better than I, because you're younger than me,
I don't know about that.
That everything will be connected to the internet at some point, in some way. There are many more devices on the communications network today than ever before, right? So it's really important to have these discussions and to figure out how government can assist and enable and make it a safe place for folks to enjoy their devices.
Do you have a vision for what states and local governments should be doing in this space?
So I currently, as you may know, sit on the BDAC, which is the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee for the FCC. And one of the things that we're discussing is looking at ways communities can work with industry and to develop a greater understanding of the wave of technology that's before us, right? And how to make it easier for industry to work with local communities to bring technology.
So I think that there are a lot of panels today that, and maybe our earlier conversation had a little bit of pushing back against the doom and gloom prognosticators.
What are they saying?
There's been a lot of doom and gloom at State of the Net so far.
Really? What are they saying? I thought this was going to be an upbeat, uplifting. Everything's.
We're always moving forward. But that being said,
technology should be fun, exciting, shiny, new, and.
Well, I want you to convince me to be an optimist.
Prepare me for what I should.
Everything's insecure, and it's all controlled by five certain companies.
And if not them, then
true.
the Russians.
And
if not the Russians, then the robots. And maybe the robots working for the Russians.
Yep.
But, I mean, that's... I want to be optimistic.
Sure.
I want to be optimistic. So can you tell me a little bit about how your agency has worked with constituents, or what sort of activities what sort of collaborations you've been working on to give us hope?
Sure. So in Massachusetts, there are a number of communities, believe it or not, that don't have cable.
That doesn't surprise me.
Cable as in television cable?
As in television
or
cable.
Or cable as in, cable as a way to get internet?
No, cable as in television cable.
Okay, well.
And as you know...
I lived in the middle of a cornfield, and we never had cable.
Right, exactly, right? And so there were roughly 40-some-odd communities in Massachusetts about 3 years ago that did not have. We're addressing that currently, but that's just getting me to where we're going. That did not have cable. And as you know, that's the primary way that residents get broadband.
Right.
So what did we do in Massachusetts? We're working with those communities. We're working with providers to try to figure out how we can bring cable service, broadband service to those communities. And we've entered into a really good working relationship with a number of providers. Okay. But also, there have been a number of municipalities that have decided to go it alone and to build their own network. And the Commonwealth is supporting them that way too.
I love that idea. I mean, you're hearing that sort of in the news a lot right now, I feel like, where municipalities are trying to build out their own broadband.
They have to, because if they don't, those communities are literally dying on the vine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the digital divide is remarkably, terribly huge right now.
Yeah,
considering
absolutely.
It's 2018, it always amazes me when I go back home and there's whole cities not cities, but villages.
And imagine being a student today,
Yeah.
right? And not being able to get online.
Yeah. Or a business.
Or a business, exactly.
Can you imagine?
Exactly. I can't imagine.
Do you know how much resources that these localities have to put in this sort of project?
So not a lot.
Okay.
Because these are rural communities, so
Right.
there's not a lot of money there. Mm-hmm. So that's why the Commonwealth is stepping up to the plate and assisting.
So I'd love to see this as a model for other states. How can you...
That's who we are in Massachusetts. We're
you always
leaders.
have been, right?
Exactly.
Going back to the programs, but
right.
I mean, can you put out some nuts and bolts about what that looks like? How is the municipality supporting the?
How's the state supporting the municipalities? So these municipalities are working with the Commonwealth. So the Commonwealth has an organization called the Massachusetts Broadband Institute.
Okay.
As the commissioner for the Department of Telecommunications and Cable, I actually sit on the board of the MBI, Massachusetts Broadband Institute. And what the institute is doing is just working with these towns, these cities and towns in the western part of the state, to figure out, okay, are you better situated to have a provider? So it could be a town here that has no service, but the town over it does have service by Comcast or Charter Communications.
Yeah.
So are you better serviced? Will you be better serviced if you just if we asked one of those providers to extend service into your town, or are you isolated, meaning there's no one around you with service, and for you to go it alone in terms of funding from the Commonwealth to bring service to your community? About 10 years ago, the Commonwealth used our dollars to create the middle mile. So there is this 1-2-3 network in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So there is broadband access, but it's just connecting to the middle mile to bring the access to the homes. And that's what Massachusetts is doing.
Isn't that like the FCC pushes for like that last mile?
Exactly. Right? It's the last mile.
So is that where 5G comes in? Is that these new technologies are going to be easier instead of laying fiber optics? Or?
Yeah, so what we're doing, so if a community is going it alone, if they're providing the service without a provider, 9 times out of 10, it's fiber to the home.
Right.
So it's not wireless. There is a wireless program, pilot program in one of our communities, Rosyln, Mass. If anyone's listening and is familiar with Massachusetts, Rosyln, Mass, has a pilot program. But it's only to part of the community. It's not to the entire community.
So I guess you mentioned you sit on FCC's BDAG board.
Yeah.
So the FCC has been a politically interesting target or topic of conversation here in D.C.
For sure.
Not to put you on the spot, but so what is your relationship with the FCC like and folks over there?
So the Commonwealth actually has a good working relationship with the FCC. We file comments every year on a number of proceedings. And
like what kind of what are you invested in? Is this LifeLock? Is this net neutrality?
Lifeline. No worries.
I've got the insecurity on the mind.
No. So it's funny.
I'm sure is a thing too.
Because a lot of people get Lifeline confused with the Lifeline service for the elderly. Yeah. And it's not that. So we do interact with the FCC on a number of issues like that one, but also the BDAC. Like I said, the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee was created with a number of stakeholders. So there are folks from industry on the BDAC. There are folks from cities and towns across the country, and state office holders as well. Not as many.
Is everybody getting along?
Let me just say this: there are not as many government officials on the BDAC as we would like, because as you can understand, that would make it.
Sure.
Easier.
It also takes time and energy for other people and other state officials.
No, absolutely.
Join!
No, exactly. But it's important to have enough or equal amount of the same voices at the table so that there could be a fair and balanced discussion.
Sure.
So as we talk about broadband deployment across the country, if the discussion is tilted, if it's just industry that's discussing about the best way to deploy, then cities and towns are left out of that discussion, and there comes it doesn't have to happen, but there may be an opportunity for a community to be trampled, and so it's really important to have communities and state, city, local officials at the table.
So how does that work with the idea of competition and smaller ISPs? Is there space at this table for tiny mom and pop ISPs, and what are we doing in order to encourage that?
So because there are so many communities across the country that don't have service, I would say absolutely there's enough room at the table. Because as you can imagine, there are some providers that the economics just don't work for them to provide. There's not enough population density for them to make it profitable for them to provide service. So I think that there is enough room at the table for large, medium to small, and even extra small service providers.
So do we want to ask a net neutrality question? I think we're coming up on a good time. So, I think it's probably we'll save the net neutrality discussion for off air. But if you have any questions for Commissioner Charles Peterson or for us, for any of the rest of the panels or interviews we'll be doing, you can tweet at us at the Internet Law and Policy Foundry with the hashtag SOTN2018. Commissioner Charles Peterson, I want to thank you again for joining us. We like to give an opportunity for a final plug or a final point.
And thank you for being optimistic.
Yes, honestly,
you're welcome.
It is great. Is there a point you want to leave us on, or just want to plug your panel?
I'd love to plug my panel. You have the title there. It's very long. The wireless.
We need a new generation to connect the Internet of everything.
But also just make a point that having state and local government at the table is key.
Excellent.
in all of these discussions.
Great. Well, thank you
Okay.
so much. This
Thank
has been
you.
excellent.
Hello, Tech Policy Grind. This is Joseph Jerome alongside Emory Roan. We are here at State of the Net talking to people about a whole wide range of tech policy stuff, and we are pleased to be joined at the moment by Rosyln Layton. She's a visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, where she works on telecommunications policy, internet regulation, and privacy, and she was on a panel entitled The Fragmentation of Communications Policy. So I guess my first question to you is communications policy fragmenting, and what do we do about that if it is?
Well, actually, I think it's reunifying.
All right.
Yeah, we went through a very divisive period. In fact, one of the things we talked about on our panel, and probably one of the, the best thing about State of the Net, it is about bipartisanship and the competition of ideas. And our panel, we started out by looking back to 1996 and the Telecom Act. And we actually had people who worked on that on the panel. And that was really a high point of bipartisanship. And it worked really well for, almost 19 years. And it sort of fell apart with the FCC during the Obama administration because they broke that agreement that was there. And things have been fragmenting since then. Now, however, the steps that Chairman Ajit Pai has taken are actually reunifying the parts of the policy. Now, there's no doubt there's splintering going on. There's a number of states that want to create their own net neutrality rules. We didn't talk about that on the panel, but for the record, that's going to be very difficult because of the preemption. We have a federal communications policy for a reason, because we don't want to have 50 states with their own internet rules. I mean, internet wouldn't work. But we also have in the Communications Act, there's rules around governing communications within the state and then interstate commerce. That goes back to our Constitution, that it's not practical for certain kinds of industries where you would regulate on a state by state. It's a non-starter because the internet communications come from everywhere and they go everywhere. So it doesn't make sense that you could do state level state level net neutrality. The bigger takeaway, though, was our panel did have a lot of consensus on a need to renew, to look at legislation, that we recognize there are a number of concerns across the ecosystem, and that there's not one regulatory solution that solves it all. I mean, it requires a higher level conversation, and one of the points that I made was the FCC hasn't been reauthorized in 30 years. It's an appropriate time to look back at Communications Act. We're at
it's
22
tough to be
years
optimistic
now.
about a congressional solution right now. Do you think? I mean,
I'm not pessimistic about it. I'm optimistic in the sense that what was important to me is that an agency that wanted to grab power was Congress came together and said, we don't want to do that. I mean, Congress authorizes the FCC. It has very explicit rules. And I think that the current FCC was recognizing its proper role and returning to what that was. Now, I'm for the will of the people. When you talk about net neutrality rules, there are 50 countries that already have them, that have had them for a long time. All of those countries have done it through legislation. So if you want that kind of solution, you need to go through the will of the people. It's not appropriate that 5 commissioners make that decision that affects 1/5 of our economy. That is something that should be, it's not clear. To me it's clear. The statute says the internet should be free and unfettered from regulation. Many people interpret that as, the FCC gets to regulate it. So clearly there's some debate about what the statute means.
In order to ensure that it's free and open, you need some sort of regulation.
I don't think so. I mean, I think what you have to be concerned about, what our First Amendment guarantees us is freedom of speech and freedom from the government imposing its preferences on communication. So if you read the First Amendment, you guys are lawyers, as we know, you have to understand that those kind of regulations where you require that a network treat the traffic in one way or another, however good it may sound, neutral or this or that, that is in fact a government imposing how the network should be run. That violates our First Amendment. What our First Amendment protects us from is the government telling private people how to run their network. Me as a consumer, what that means is that I have to value all content the same, and I don't. I don't want to value, the films of the Harvey Weinstein Company the same as my program for my children. I don't want my money going to provision networks for content that, that may violate, my beliefs or my preferences. The way that, what those rules were
The three bright line rules, just to...
What those were doing were those were price controls to favor Silicon Valley, the largest users of the internet, that take up 70 to 80%. Because what that means is that all the cost falls on me as the consumer. Those guys, the Netflixes and Googles of the world, the Amazons, they're not paying for their use. So if we want to build a network, all the cost falls on me, and they're not paying their fair share. Just particularly when I'm not watching the films of Netflix. I don't want to have to pay for the cost to provision the network.
So it seems like you're just anti-net neutrality at this point, or I guess the onus is on you to define what.
Well, I mean, I earned my PhD in the topic, and I'm actually very much in favor of the rules where I've seen them work. I mean, we've had a very successful form of net neutrality in the Nordic countries for 5 years, which was done through a multi-stakeholder model. They have codes of conduct. It's what's used in Switzerland today. Japan and South Korea have also had successful frameworks that support innovation.
Can we unpack
as well
that a
as
little bit? Because I mean, I think that net neutrality, as we understand it, or as it is talked about in America, is the three bright line rules.
Sure.
Those are the things that are communicatable, that are I think digestible, and I think that most people at least the studies that I've shown have seen support for the three bright line rules as an internet theory. When you're talking about successful net neutrality programs in Nordic countries and Asian countries, what does that apply? What does that come out to? What does that look like?
Right. So in those cases, you actually had instances where, Denmark is a great example. It's a country where I live most of the year. The telecom operators actually volunteered, and they said, look, we understand that this is a concern. We're going to agree to these set of principles, and we're putting the onus on us. They said it to the regulator, they guaranteed to the public, then they said, you can judge us. We're going to hold up these standards, and we want to prove it to you so you don't have to make the rules yourself. And the regulator, the government said, this is great, and they have had a dialogue for that going back to 2011.
So is that a self-regulated, or did they just regulate themselves, or,
So they would have basically they have a stakeholder group, and where stakeholders can bring up their concerns. They are allowed to make complaints.
How are stakeholders defined in that
So
context?
I mean, anybody who wants to be a stakeholder. I mean, that's what, if you've ever been to Internet Governance Forum, a stakeholder can be an individual, it can be an organization. There's not an attempt to define the stakeholder, because that might preclude some parties who believe that they're a stakeholder. So there are no violations on record. You have an extremely vibrant ecosystem in Denmark. A lot of their apps that are some of the most popular in the world have come from there. A lot of the food delivery apps have there, Endomondo, some healthcare. And it's interesting if you compare that period where there was a multi-stakeholder approach adopted compared to something like the Netherlands, which has had hard net neutrality going back to 2012. Nobody can name a Dutch app. There's not been a flowering, the next Google hasn't come out of the Netherlands. And so, and this is what we see in a number of countries who signed on to having net neutrality rules, but don't find that their countries now make the innovation that they thought they would.
How are you tying net neutrality to innovation? Since it's my take that all the content providers, a lot of the startups in Silicon Valley have been at the charge of supporting net neutrality from the FCC. It's the broadband providers that are opposed and up in arms, and broadband providers in the United States, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, tend to be legacy companies. I don't think they tend to be terribly innovative. So I'm just curious how you're connecting innovation to net neutrality.
So first of all, there's a lot of ways that we can define innovation in a lot of ways, right? So
this is true.
Yeah.
How would you define innovation in this
So it means
context?
something, doing new things, right? So, but let's go back to what you're saying. We didn't have the hard net neutrality rules until 2015. So all the period prior to that, there were not specific. So all the innovation that we enjoyed actually came out of the bipartisan light touch approach that we talked about at the beginning of this session, and what we talked about today.
But that's overstating things. I mean, even the Bush administration was encouraging net neutrality.
Right, but those were struck down in court.
By ISPs who seem to be.
No, well, I don't. Then went to the Supreme Court. It was struck down by the justices. I mean, that you couldn't do this. But let me answer your question.
Was that bad too?
So no, what I'm going to give you. Let me explain to you how I answer the question. What I'm looking at is the statutes that the countries have adopted. And so if we look at the European countries, the EU today even has rules that say we want to guarantee the internet as an engine of innovation. The FCC's policy says the same thing. So I said, fine, this is great, because you guys have figured out the magic formula. All we need to do is make these rules and we'll magically have innovation. So what I want to know is why aren't we, Chile was this country that adopted these hard rules. Can you please name an app from Chile? Like, can you please name an app from these first countries who were first movers? I mean, in the sense, I'm taking them at their word. If they're going to say this, because I mean, we should have a way to measure that the policy works. There should be more innovation coming from the countries with the quote hardest rules. And so,
is that not overlooking the first entries to the market, though?
No. So here's
market
but
dominance
you're
of
absolutely.
the West?
So here's my point: is that the people. So the policy statements are not recognizing that there are many factors that influence the ecosystem. Okay, you're absolutely right. There are many things that would be there. But to simply say that net neutrality is responsible for all this, there's no way to prove that. And if you look at the countries...
No, necessarily. The argument for net neutrality is just that it is pure innovation.
But listen, if you're going to... But that is what that's what the statutes say in these various countries. This FCC, at the time in 2015, they said in order to... we know that there's a virtuous circle and this is the way that it works. And there's nothing in the academic literature that proves that. There's no formula. I understand that people may like that, they like that, the way that sounds, but what I want to see is a scientific formula that would prove it. I want to be able to go to the country that has the...
You're asking a lot of economics, though, right? I mean,
well, no, but the economics wasn't done. Okay, we know that the FCC during that time was an economics-free zone. This chief economist, that's how he described it. He described the order in that way. Okay, so I'm one of the few people who actually went around the world and counted 5 years before and 5 years after rules how many apps in your mobile ecosystem. Now, yes, there are many things like different kinds of networks, different kinds of phones, different languages, but if we're really saying that net neutrality creates innovation, we should be able to look at the countries that had the hardest rules for the longest time and that they would have the best results. I compared two similar European countries, Denmark and Netherlands. Denmark took the soft approach. They are doing way better than the Netherlands in terms of prices, competition, number of apps, the sophistication of the marketplace. They were the first people to sell unlimited data. They were way ahead. The Netherlands just has not created apps that everybody knows, versus there are games that come out of Denmark that people all over the world have played. So what I'm just saying is they didn't have to have hard net neutrality rules in Denmark to make them successful. Now the EU has a law that all the EU countries have to abide by, okay? So it's over and done with. They did it through the will of the people, they made legislation. Their rules are based, they don't have specific throttling, paid prioritization, blocking rules, but they do have disclosures on speeds. They do have traffic management requirements. So they have their set of things.
Are there any of those sort of sets of rules that you would support, or?
Well, so the problem is a lot of them are duplicative because there were speed disclosures in most of the countries already. So that you're kind of adding bureaucracy. So for a lot of countries, small European countries, they now have 2, 3, or 4 agencies who are certifying the speeds. The Consumer Protection Authority does it, and the telecom regulator does it, and the competition authority. So it's not a good use if your resources are scarce in the country. If it's only speed disclosures are what matters, that's something that you can do with your competition authority. Because if you make a contract to someone promising XYZ, and then it's not there, you can just sue the person on breach of contract. So if you applied that in the U.S., you only need Federal Trade Commission because you're just enforcing a contract. But let me go back to your point here. No blocking and throttling is, I believe, a First Amendment violation. And the reason, and there's 7 petitions now at the Supreme Court. One of them is from the guy, co-inventor of Voice over IP. And he couldn't launch his app during the open internet order period because his app doesn't work without paid prioritization. He has invented a technology which puts high definition voice behind social media. So you would hear the comments in real time. And if he can't guarantee the signals, his app doesn't work. So he has a very innovative technology that can't work under the 2015 Obama open internet rules. So he sued the FCC, and we're waiting now to hear from Supreme Court whether they'll hear his case. And fundamentally, he's going back to, a lot of the concerns from innovators in the telecom world, who said, look, we don't want to have voice over IP to be treated like the rotary phone. It's a fundamentally new technology. You shouldn't use rules designed for another era onto my technology. And that's his side. I mean, I'm not,
Okay.
so that's his particular view. So I don't think this issue is cut and dry. And I think that we have to be concerned about any legislation that we make, which is ultimately the only way to go here. We do have to balance it with our First Amendment protections, because as a user, I might say, please block XYZ technology for me. I may request that. I may want to buy a service that blocks spam and malware and all these other offensive things. I might say, I want to have a particular filtered service. And this has been recognized by a number of scholars, particularly Brent Skorup from George Mason University. There is a First Amendment issue in that the way the Open Internet Order was written, that the ISPs could just opt out. They could simply say, look, I'm offering curated internet service and I'm not offering public internet, and these rules don't apply to me. And that would be a very easy cop-out, because...
Isn't there like a zero rating end run around the... No blocking, no throttling.
Right. So, the zero ratings is another interesting issue, because it goes back to the freedom to contract. If I, as a consumer, want to buy, I want to have freedom for different kinds of offers in the marketplace. There's a lot of valuable. For example, I think that everything.gov should be zero rated. Why shouldn't we be able to access all of the government content online for free? Why do I have to pay to submit my taxes to IRS? If I want to get health information online, my health provider's willing to pay for that for me. Why should I have to pay for that? I mean, it saves them money if I don't have an asthma attack, right? That's one of the basic cases for having price discrimination in the broadband access, because those, just for health alone, that we could help people who want to stop smoking, who are getting over cancer, who are coping with heart disease. They could be able...
I could be wrong here, but didn't Chairman Wheeler, they had a rules release, I believe, that they said that zero rating is permitted, but they're going to be watching it. They were watching it closely, but that was a way of sort of permitting the kind of, provided there was enough disclosure of throttling for those kinds of infrastructure necessary purposes.
So the European Commission, the Competition Authority, they did a 200-page paper on zero rating. It's comprehensive. They have looked at it every which way, and they said it doesn't create anti-competitive concerns. So as a person who is interested to help the regulator use the resources wisely, that's not a good choice of them using their resources, considering the whole world of telecom policies that we have to look at, that them spending their time investigating every offer on the marketplace, and there'll be thousands that they'd have to look at, and it would also require them monitoring networks, which could potentially violate my privacy.
There were some bright line rules.
Yeah, so bright line rules really concerns me. In the sense that it also creates, we think that we just make bright line rules and all the litigation is done. There's litigation all over the place now in the European Union because of what everybody thinks will solve it. And so that's what I'm trying to say. I agree legislation is the way to go, but I'm also not optimistic that resolves everything. There could be a Supreme Court case here too that will not. I frankly I would like them to see what do these Supreme Courts say about this in the First Amendment, and there are other questions, separation of power, major questions doctrine. There's a number of areas there.
So one thing I guess we haven't really touched on, and I'm trying to channel my internet neutrality advocate here. Well, we haven't talked about the competition angle, because
Sure.
You've been discussing that as a consumer, this is a contract with an ISP, and I should be able to get what I want. I think where we all just sort of disagree is the level of competition. So my simple question to you is: U.S. broadband internet access markets, are they competitive?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And getting more so all the time.
How do you define that?
So because I'm looking at the ways that you get online.
Okay.
Okay. Because I want to get on. I have half a dozen ways that I can get online. And to me,
is mobile broadband really a sufficient
for
solution for
the
business
things?
work?
So let's say, so you're just saying for what? For the business
Well,
work.
I'm saying
so let's say my mom. Okay. For the kind of things that she does, it's absolutely sufficient.
It also precludes her from being able to see the next big thing that might.
No, but what I'm trying to say is,
neutrality.
but here's the other part though. She wants to be able to choose. So here's the other thing. Because does she necessarily? Does she have to be a video gamer to pass muster in your eyes? Different people are going to do different things online. Okay, so the groups that I work most with are, let's say, people in developing countries. For them, it's can I get a free SMS? Can I get this health information that I need? Right, and the quickest way to do is through mobile broadband. And maybe somebody is delivering it for free. Someone's the hospital's paying for it, Facebook, whatever the case may be. But just because we do one app, that may be enough for some people. The fact that they're not...
How many Americans do you think would be satisfied with purely mobile broadband?
Well, let's say this today, many elderly people who are not online at all, that would be able to use Facebook on a tablet, that as a starting point, right, compared to zero, and then doing that. Now, what I'm not trying to make this about lowest common denominator here, because we have many various people in different situated in different ways.
Right. Lowest common denominator.
Right. Right.
At the same time, you don't want internet access as a right of the rich.
But the other part is it costs money. So if you can say to people, look, I'm going to give you. There are people today who you can. Let's say money was no object, and we brought them fiber to the home.
Broadband companies.
Are you giving the interview here? What is this? Okay.
It's like a discussion.
Right. But so let's say this: there are many elderly people today. It's talking about you can bring the horse to water, and you can't make it drink. It doesn't matter if you make it faster or more throughput. They're not going to adopt. If people fundamentally don't think there's anything good on the internet, it doesn't matter to them that they have a better speed connection. So that isn't a good. They would rather have the cash in hand.
But weren't the people that were 5 years ago thinking that there was nothing good on the internet that are now able to have Facebook on their tablets, the elderly populations that you're speaking of?
But what I'm trying to say here is I want to allow the market forces to get there. I don't want the FCC defining every single person has to have XYZ, because what did we see during this Obama era in that was that the deployment in the rural areas decreased. Who was hurt most? Elderly people who had no connection anyway were even less likely to get online. And this has been shown. You can look up Michelle Connolly. She did great work on the digital divide, that net neutrality didn't help it, because the marginal companies, we're not talking about the big ISPs. I'm talking about the 4,551 companies who are not the AT&T and Verizons of the world. They're the ones who were hurt because they couldn't get bank loans. The bank said, sorry, the FCC can regulate your prices, you lost your business case, we're not lending money to you. So I'm not worried about big companies with armies of lawyers. I'm worried about the marginal ISPs serving rural areas. They're the ones, it
just feels like the digital divide then becomes the people that have internet and don't, to the people that have full internet and the people that are have the subsidized internet.
Well, so here's the other part. We've also spent billions of dollars in subsidies. We have very little to show for it. It hasn't worked. I mean, we also know we got to fix that part, because the money was going to a lot of companies that didn't make the upgrades, or was, who knows what happened to it. I would have liked it to go to these old people and let them buy, right, whatever the case may be, or go to a program at their local library. How do you get online, right? That would have been a great use of the money. It didn't go there.
I agree wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly.
I mean,
one other solution. And
and here's the other part. And also, as a person who I live in Denmark, where you've got 15% of the people are mobile only for broadband. Okay, they choose that because it is, they have multiple. They actually have fiber to the home networks in rural areas, multiple coverage. But because they made a policy where they wanted a technologically neutral approach, the government isn't deciding that it has to be wired, wireless. They're letting what they looked at is to say, as much as possible, we want. They led with government solutions. They said we want to be able to digitize all of our services online. So what did that do? It forced people to design things in simple ways. So, that there's no checks, for example. All the banking is digital. Everyone's using mobile pay. Because they had a look at digital first, right? They led with the service, not with the network. Because people don't adopt networks, they adopt services. So when you take that approach...
The services are built for the networks. Your service, like the kind of services that you can deploy, are based on the networks, right? Or
no, I mean in the sense that in this case they would say, here I'll put it. So part of this is driven by the high labor cost, right? They don't want to have to pay people to do things in an analog way if you can do it digitally. So nobody's processing paper checks, right? It's all digital. I mean, I know that you guys are millennials. You never did that anyway. But I do remember the days of paper checks. So in the sense that if you were going to have any kind of business with the government, it's done digitally. You can't call your local office. There's nobody answering the phone, so you have to send an email. So these kinds of things where you lead with the government digitized the service actually brought everybody online. Those were services that they had to use. So people went the path of least resistance, which was doing things in a mobile app. They could have done it you can use a computer to do it, you can use a mobile app. I mean, what I'm trying to say here is there are a range of solutions to get there. And my pushback about we must have bright line rules, well, I'm going to say, okay, what are we trying to solve for here? What's the problem that we have to resolve? Now, the other...
It seems like there's a couple problems. I mean, it's general disdain or lack of trust for ISPs. It's a history of at least several prominent high-profile bad examples of them doing bad things.
Well, but listen, those kind of Title II approach is not going to get you more competition. I mean, what Title II will get you is one network. You're going to get a government monopoly of broadband. I mean, that's what we had under Title II with AT&T. Okay. You had AT&T network managed by the FCC, and what did we get from that? It was so bad that the Department of Justice had to break it up because they overcharged the consumers and the company colluded with the regulator. So I don't want that for the internet. I mean,
regulatory capture is obviously a huge issue.
It's a big deal.
Huge issue.
I mean, that's what I'm concerned about. I mean, I've got a paper on Federal Trade Commission looking at all of the net neutrality concerns and what tools does the FTC have to address it. And you can look at the number one issue, which was the AT&T mobility case.
Yes.
That originated in the FTC. And the FCC came along and went after AT&T for the same issue and made a $100 million fine. That they didn't follow through on it, but that originated at the FTC. So there's no magic that the FTC doesn't have the brain power to figure this stuff out.
But I think the argument might be that the FTC lacks the budgetary power to.
Well, here's what you get. You get pound for pound. You get a hell of a lot of processing. The number one complaint amongst consumers about communications is robocalls.
Sure.
So that is overwhelmingly the number one complaint. Net neutrality stuff is about 7% of the complaint load at FCC, and most of those are complaints about speeds.
Yeah, it can be tough to track. I mean, it can be tough to recognize.
We don't know if the speed can be related to the device. It isn't necessarily the ISP. It could be the app you're using. It could be the user's configuration.
Wouldn't that point to like it would be tougher to rely on that statistic then, that the throttling and net neutrality complaints are lower. Well, yeah, it's because there's so many more factors. You don't know if it's your device, and you don't know if it's your ISP, but sort of confusion means
that's the wrong approach. I mean, because what you're trying to say, if you talk about blocking and throttling and prioritization, and the issue is the person hasn't properly configured his phone, you have the wrong set of rules to address the consumer complaint.
Right.
So the consumer is being misled that the ISP is doing something bad when the consumer himself hasn't properly configured his phone.
Well, I think it's that the issue can be obfuscated in so many ways, right? I mean, it is that the average consumer may lack the understanding to be able to configure their phone so that they don't know whether it's their device or it's their ISP. And if we don't have the rules outlining exactly saying what the ISPs can't do, then it just introduces more confusion, as I see it. And I'm just teeing up questions.
Well, I'm trying to think. I just downloaded an app, right? Because it's very hard to determine when you've had a net neutrality violation. So what's the app that I just downloaded?
Some iTunes kerfuffle.
WeHey, that's allowing me to do spontaneous speed tests all over the place. They're going to try and do some crowdsourcing as to whether anything bad's.
But this is not. It isn't a scientifically accurate measure of the network. What that is measuring is your particular app on your choice of device. Okay, that isn't telling you about the entire network itself, because what you would like to have is an end-to-end speed of what is it. It's impossible to know because the ISP can't sell that to you. You would have to buy, you'd have to contract for that level of service, and that's not what you contract for. You contract for best effort service. So what I'm trying to say is we're taking consumers down a completely wrong path here. What we should really be saying is there are many actors, there's many things going on, it's very complex, and don't try to be, distracting them by saying the ISP is the problem here, because there are many things at play. I mean, if all the people who love regulation, they should embrace a world, because there will be much more for them if you actually take into account how the internet actually works. It's just too easy to reduce it and say, oh, it's the ISP. I mean, you can also look at the other regulators have dealt with this. Ofcom in the UK, they did a major study. They looked at every single tool purporting to measure traffic management, and they show scientifically none of them are accurate. for exactly the reasons I told you. Because the network itself is so complex, you can't relate it to the ISP. There's so many other things going on. And so you as a regulator, it's not a good use of your time to be doing this. When there's so much more good you could be doing, addressing what people are really concerned about, which is robocalls. They would like more deployment. I agree with you. I think it would be a great thing that rural areas would have more facilities providers. I'm absolutely for that.
I am concerned about the creation of an underclass of internet citizens.
Well, I mean, if you look at the direction where we've gone from, the prices since we launched the internet have fallen 90%. The speeds have increased about 5,000%. The trend line is positive. The other part of it is Americans today consume more content per capita than any country, including North Korea.
We create more content than any country per capita.
But what that's also saying is if there's fundamentally a problem of content being blocked, why wouldn't that be shown in the data? Well, how can it possibly be that we're consuming more content all the time per capita? Okay, then that's allowing for the super users, and there's a simultaneous problem. I mean, it actually shows you that networks can be doing more with less. I mean, that they keep accommodating, right? And, I'm actually agreeing with you on a number of fronts. I'd like to see more in rural areas, absolutely. But what I don't agree to is that it has to be one solution and one speed and that's all that matters. There's many different ways. If you go to Alaska, okay, there's many parts of Alaska that's very remote, expensive to get to. It can cost $100,000 per home. Now you can say to those Alaskans, I can give you $100,000 cash or I can bring you fiber to the home. What would the Alaskans say? Okay. Now, alternatively, I can also say I have a great fixed wireless solution for you, which is being deployed, and maybe it will cost you $1,000. Would you like to have, $99 cash and $1,000 you pay? So part of innovation and technology is that we figure out how to solve things in different ways, right? So for many areas, it's not practical that everybody has to have a fiber network to the home, because there's a lot of other things I would like to see in our country, that many other things we'd all would like to have. The internet's not the only thing. I understand for millennials they may prioritize that above other things, but maybe some people want a school, maybe some people want, if money grew on trees, we would do it all, right?
So I agree with your premise that we need that there should be more and more options available, and we ought to be experimenting in different ways.
Yeah.
So the initial reaction, we actually were speaking to Commissioner Karen Charles Peterson from the Massachusetts Department of Telecommunications and Cable earlier this afternoon, and her response is we ought to experiment with municipal broadband.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. Because. What actually Title II was the wolf in sheep's clothing to try to bring up municipal broadband. That was all about finding a way to tax private providers so that you generate a source of revenue to give to municipalities. And having seen it all over the world, it's actually a case where I wish we would adopt the European Union rules about it, because they have actually done the work to classify the areas where there should be for public investment.
Sure.
So, for example, you can't put up municipal broadband where there's already private provision. You have to prioritize the areas where have no networks at all. So, that's I think that when funds are limited, that would be the way to go. But there's a lot of concerns that I have about municipal broadband because it's not fair competition. Private companies don't have the same capabilities to go to, to be able to tax the citizens to recover their investments. If they have a loss, the shareholders have to bear it. So, we also don't have a great track record in terms of, there's a long way to get a break even on a lot of these projects. And cities have many things that they have to do. They do not necessarily have the advantages to be experts in...
But if they want to be, shouldn't they be permitted to try?
Yeah, if that's what that community decides. But they also, they need full information about the costs. There's a number of studies that will show, if you're looking at an investment, it's going to take 30, 40 years. I think that a lot of cities don't understand that responsibility, and also they have to deal with the sales and marketing. They have to deal with the things that are associated.
Well,
and also the business
play out
case.
very
Yes.
soon.
Well, I mean, we are seeing it. There are the studies have been done.
Well,
on
Dr.
this.
Layton, I want to thank you for joining us. I hope I wasn't too contentious.
Yeah, no, I don't know if
but
we
this
even
was-
covered
I know.
this panel. We went off on the tangent.
Well, is there any-
Well, here, let me just leave you with one line in case you might want to use. So, what I want to say is great about State of the Net is its bipartisan nature, where it really tries to encourage competition of ideas. I think just as we've talked today, we're trying to challenge ourselves with the best arguments for the various proposals. I think one of our panel there was that we did try to get on the table the competing views on these topics so that the audience can push themselves to think, do I really understand this issue? Have I covered, what's important? I want to re-examine what I thought. Was that the right approach? Is there a better way to do it? Should we look at data from other countries? Should we try different models? Can we look at, randomized trials for policy? Are there different? How can I be smarter about this? So I think that's what.
I think this is a bipartisan problem.
Yeah.
I think that.
But it's a
quicker we
bipartisan
recognize that-
opportunity. It's
Absolutely.
a bipartisan opportunity. Absolutely.
And on that bombshell, I think we will wrap this conversation. But thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Rosyln. I really,
My pleasure.
Really enjoyed
Thank
this
you, guys.
conversation.
All right.